Now, I've been making more of these response type videos because I think I've pretty much said all I have to say about the evidence that I'm aware of. So the kind of video I make has changed a little bit. Recently, Donald Willis has been talking about Whaley, the cab driver, and his supposed trip that Oswald took in his cab on the day of the assassination. And here he says in the Education Forum, apparently, the Warren Commission panicked when witness William W. Whaley went off script on March 12, 1964, and testified that he dropped Oswald off at Natchez and North Beckley. In his 11/23/63 affidavit, Whaley mentions only 500 block of North Beckley. This would have screwed up the official ETA of Oswald at 10th and Patton of 116. As the Warren report says, Natchez is within one half block of the rooming house at 1026 North Beckley, where Oswald was living. That would in fact seem to have been an ideal spot for Oswald to get out of the cab, right in front of the house, but close, not right in front of the house, but close, as Norman Ridley Shear acknowledges. Close enough, perhaps, that is, for Oswald to see without being seen. The commission, which had all the time in the world, went so far as to recall Whaley, who capitulated and now said that he left Oswald at the intersection of Beckley and Neely. That would have meant a walk of about 6 minutes to get to the rooming house, then another 3 minutes before departing, arriving at 10th and Patton at about 1:16, a 13-minute walk. However, Whaley's blundering out of left field references to Natchez throws that timeline a bit out of whack. Dutifully he retains Beckley through it all, from affidavit to testimony to corrected testimony, but as cab driver he must have known that Natchez and Beckley did not actually intersect. Certainly he did know by 11/23/63. In fact, that might have been where Oswald actually instructed him to go, Natchez near Beckley. How else would Whaley have latched onto Natchez? To reconstruct the adjusted timeline, out of cab 1254 on Natchez, rooming house 1255, leaving rooming house 1258, 10th and Patton 111. Leaving Oswald patiently waiting around for Tippett to show up 4 or 5 minutes later. However, no witness saw the gunman do any such waiting, just walking. Revised adjusted timeline then for Oswald, leaving rooming house 1258, arriving Texas Theater 116, no stopovers. So apparently Donald Willis thinks that Oswald did not go to 10th and Patton at all, that he just left the rooming house and went directly to the Texas Theater where he was arrested later. And apparently he's using this references to Natchez as support for that theory of his. This kind of thing is something that Willis often does, where he focuses on details which I think aren't even real, and other people do this too, and they've got their whole theories they string out from what I think is invalid information. And the invalid information here, I believe, is that Oswald actually rode in Whaley's cab, which I think he did not. Now, this fellow here responded to Willis on the Education Forum, and he provided this map, to which I added the red ovals. And the red oval on top shows, within that oval is Natchez Street. Natchez Street merges into Eldorado Ave, and Eldorado Ave actually goes to the intersection with Beckley. You can see North Beckley there goes south, but it also goes north of that intersection. So you could say that Eldorado Ave intersects with North Beckley, even though Natchez doesn't. And I've looked at older maps from the 1960s, and it looks like this is the way it was back then too. So Natchez does not intersect with Beckley at all, but it could be that there was some confusion about this intersection. You could think Natchez is the street that goes through when really it's Eldorado, and that would be a reasonable error to make. So it's possible that Whaley could have been talking about this intersection on the top here, which is very close to where Oswald was living at the time. The oval on the bottom includes Neely Street, where it intersects with Beckley, and that fellow there marked that spot with an A. And so we're talking about two different stops here. And even there, when Whaley says 500 block, the 500 block is south of Neely Street. Neely Street is more of the 700 block area, 6 to 700 block. So there's definitely some confusion here about where Whaley left Oswald, even though at one point he does say it was Neely Street. The blocks he's giving change, and the street name changes too from Netches to Neely. So it's not easy to explain what's going on here. Doesn't seem like it's simply a mistake where he gave the wrong street name for the intersection. It seems like he doesn't really know where he left Oswald. Whaley talked to the Warren Commission attorneys on 3 separate occasions. On the first occasion, he said that he brought Oswald to the 500 block of North Beckley. On the second occasion, he said it was the 1500 North block, the 1500 block of North Beckley. And on the third occasion, he said it was the 700 block. So it seems to me that Whaley doesn't really know where he brought Oswald. And I think this is because Oswald never really rode in his cab in the first place. I think Whaley was a cooperative character who was engaged after the assassination in order to tell this story, in order to explain how Oswald got to Oak Cliff. The official story says that Oswald got on a bus near Dealey Plaza, and then that bus got stuck in traffic, so Oswald got off that bus and went to Whaley's cab, and that's how he got to Oak Cliff. And I think this is a story for Oswald's movements that was created after the fact by the authorities, whether it was the Dallas police or somebody else advising the Dallas police. But Whaley was not talked to until the day after the assassination, so there would have been enough time to engineer his story, though it might not have been engineered perfectly. And apparently Whaley didn't have the story perfect. And I think the changing of the location of where Whaley dropped off Oswald reflects that this is not a real story. And another indication that this is not a real story is what Whaley says about Oswald's jacket and or jackets. First he says Oswald, was dressed in just ordinary work clothes. It wasn't khaki pants, but they were khaki material, blue, faded blue color, like a blue uniform made in khaki. Then he had on a brown shirt with a little silver-like stripe on it, and he had on some kind of jacket. I didn't notice very close, but I think it was a work jacket that almost matched the pants. So he's saying it's a blue jacket. Oswald's wearing a blue uniform sort of thing with a jacket matching pants. And then later on, Joe Ball says, here's Commission Exhibit number 162, which is a gray jacket with a zipper. I think that is the jacket he had on when he rode with me in the cab. So now Whaley is saying it's a gray jacket, apparently. Looks something like it. And here is Commission Exhibit number 163. Does this look like anything he had on? He had this one on, or the other one. Now it sounds like, though they're not really clear, that Exhibit 163 is yet another jacket. That is right, Mr. Ball says. I'm not sure what he's saying is right. That is what I told you I noticed. I told you about the shirt being open. He had on the blue jackets with the open shirt. Wait a minute, we have got the shirt which you have identified as the rust brown shirt with the gold stripe in it. Yes, sir. You said that that jacket now, it might have been clean, but the jacket he had on looked more the color like a uniform set. But he had on this coat on over the other jacket, I'm sure, sir. So now I think he's saying that the coat the Warren Commission is showing him, he had on over the jacket he had already introduced into the evidence in his testimony. This is the blue-gray jacket, heavy blue-gray jacket. Now, Mr. Ball is saying that the gray jacket is a blue-gray jacket. Sounds like he's adjusting it to fit Whaley's earlier description. And Whaley says, yes, sir. So it sounds like Whaley doesn't really remember what Oswald was wearing, probably because Oswald was never in his cab, and he's just trying to positively identify Oswald by saying what the Warren Commission shows him, or what Mr. Ball shows him, is the jacket that Oswald was wearing. And I think this means that Oswald was never in the cab in the first place. And this, from his Warren Commission, says the police came and got him, Whaley, on the day after the assassination, and the FBI was waiting for him at the police station. And so Whaley's story could have been created on the day after, and enough time to create a story, but perhaps not enough time to get it straight in every detail, and that might reflect why his story has the problems it has. William Whaley, the cab driver, suffered a mysterious death in 1965 in an automobile accident. He was killed, as was the driver of the other car that hit him head-on, according to this 1965 Dallas Morning News article. Both Whaley and his passenger in the cab he was driving, both of them were in the U.S. Navy Air Reserve. And this sort of military connection seems to be common in this case among questionable characters. And I think Whaley is a questionable character. And his death crash just happened to be arranged completely by naval reservists. That is, himself and his passenger were both in the Naval Reserve at the time. The passenger, Maurice R. Barnes, in his obituary from 2014, it says at age 32, during his weekend Navy Reserve duty in Dallas, Texas, he was in the backseat of a taxi cab on his way from the Dallas airport to the Navy base when the cab was struck head-on by a drunk driver. This tragic accident killed everyone on both vehicles except Murray. He suffered a severe brain injury when he was ejected from the vehicle onto the highway. The head injury was so severe that he was given less than a 20% chance to live. After weeks in a coma, he recovered, later married, and had a wonderful family. So at the time of this accident, even though he was 32, he was not married, and he was in the Naval Reserve, and he was the only survivor of the accident, and he had a miraculous recovery, so good a recovery, even though he was brain damaged and in a coma, that he eventually married and had a family and went on to do other things. In this photograph, William Whaley is on the left, and on the right we can see the back of William Scoggins, the other cabbie, who I think was conscripted by the conspiracy to play a role. He was the cabbie that was parked at 10th and Patton when Tippit supposedly was shot on 10th Street. So they could have got hold of Whaley either through his military connection or through William Scoggins, who himself had worked for a defense contractor for 15 and a half years before he decided to drive a cab in Oak Cliff. So I think there was this connection between two people in this cab company to the conspiracy somehow. And I think Whaley was brought in as an emergency measure because they didn't want Oswald on the bus. I think, I won't get into why they didn't want him on the bus. I think this story was created in order to get Oswald off the bus and to Oak Cliff in time to be seen at the rooming house where Early and Roberts saw him. So I think Whaley was a fudge here, and I think his story, the inconsistencies in his story, support that interpretation. And that's that. So, as he often does, I think Donald Willis brings up some good stuff to think about here. But as I almost always think, his explanation of things is just often la-la land, because he's making the wrong assumptions about the evidence. Willis seems to be assuming that the cab ride really happened, and I think the lesson here is that the cab ride did not happen.